Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is our 122nd meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you, everyone, for joining and all the folks who have been part of this process for the 122 consecutive weeks, who are veterans in this process, and those who are new. I want to encourage people who are new joining us today
Donc,
in
j'encourage
whatever
les gens
capacity.
qui
French,
sont
you are in the
nouveaux.
wrong channel.
French
Sorry,
interpreter.
sorry.
I want to encourage, if you are new during the discussion period, to please introduce yourself, tell us the country you're from, and if you're part of any organizations, if you are doing various initiatives, or you have ideas. I want to encourage lots of discussion with new people, especially. I like to, well, I'll tell people who I am. I'm Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small, my co-moderator. I like to remind people why we started this forum 122 weeks ago, and we did this to unite the international peace movement. As many people know who have been doing this for a while, there is a lot of infighting, a lot of prevention of dialogue and discussions amongst many different groups of many different philosophies. And we want to step over that. We want to create a place where everyone can discuss, coordinate their activities from whatever nation, language, religion, philosophical outlook. If you are for true peace, you are welcome here. And let's continue this process by, if you have been on this for a while, you have the invitation, please share it with someone. Share it with your organization, your friends, or reasonable enemies who you think should be on this discussion. To start us off today, we have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Thank you. Hello to all of you. Well, while the world still, or at least the better part of the world, is still holding their breath, what will be the result of the so-called peace plan for Gaza, where President Trump has now given an ultimatum until the 6th, that is Monday, for Hamas to respond, and the fate of the Palestinian people still hangs completely in the air, and the horrible genocide continues on the ground. Nevertheless, I want to start off with something different, namely the basic speech given by President Putin in Sochi in the so-called Valdai Club, because I think this is a message which he gave to the world, which I think should be absolutely not overheard. And I would ask all members of the IPC to make sure that it gets out everywhere, because what Putin said explicitly and with emphasis is that Russia is not planning an attack on NATO, that all this talk about this in the Western media and Western politics is completely unfounded, that it's nonsense. And then he elaborated that it's an attempt by the politicians to distract from domestic internal problems, and reflects the fact that the European populations are not united behind their leaders. He is also emphasizing that the attempt by the West to isolate Russia has completely failed, as did the effort to establish a hierarchical order where the West would be on top and run and dominate the world, that has failed as well. And as an example of why the attempt to isolate Russia has failed, he cited the close friendship which Russia has, especially with China and India, the two largest countries in terms of population and two of the fastest growing countries, with whom Russia has established even closer relations than ever before. However, he said he warned that the West should not dismiss his words as propaganda, but that this is a a crucial opportunity, an offer of peace. However, this peace must be based on mutual respect and respect for the sovereignty of the others, but that the path to stability is still open. And I would really emphasize this because, the warmongering in Europe in particular in the recent period has become absolutely deafening. And I think it is extremely important that President Putin sort of uses this annual Valdai speech to give a clear-cut offer to the West to enter dialogue, to enter discussions, which right now is completely off the table if you look at Merz or Macron or any one of these so-called Western leaders, who, by the way, met today, Macron, Merz, and Steinmeier, and many others, in Saarbrücken, because today is the 3rd of October, which is the day of the German unification, the official date, and the place where that date is commemorated is shifting every year, and this time it's the Saarland. So Macron was invited. However, I don't think the speeches given by them was anything unusual or something one didn't hear before. Now, it is very important because Putin also mentioned that about the threat that the Tomahawk cruise missile may be delivered from the United States to the Ukrainians, that this would indeed be a new stage of escalation because it cannot be operated without the United States. Well, there were also many other speeches, one of them given, for example, or a statement by Peskov, who blasted the attempt by the European Union to, quote, steal 130 billion of money, which is right now sitting in Belgium, in a bank in Belgium, warning that this would tremendously boomerang if that money would be stolen by a criminal gang. Also, the Federal Council Deputy Alexei Pushkov basically said that the present warmongering of the West is reminding one of 1914, and that again, Europe is the source of war. He also said the fact that Trump had said in his speech, together with Hexet in Quantico, Virginia, that the United States must become the strongest army in the world, so strong that nobody else can attack it, unfortunately would represent a return to the doctrine of the neocons. He didn't mention Wolfowitz, but that is what he referred to, namely the idea that the United States has to be, that cannot allow to ever have any nation or group of nations bypass them in terms of economic, military, or political power, which, according to Pushkov, is impossible given the fact that the United States has no longer the dominant position as the first economy, but has been bypassed by China already. So also Lavrov spoke in Sochi, where he accused Europe of being aggressive, having the disease of rabies, what dogs normally get, and that it's very dangerous. And the most dangerous would be Germany, the most revanchist. And then he quoted Merz saying that the containment of Russia must continue, even if the Ukraine eventually will be ended. Russia must be contained and cut down. Now, Prime Minister Orban of Hungary, who participated in the EU summit in Copenhagen, afterwards put out a statement saying that the impression he got from that summit is that Europe is preparing for war. Now that is obviously extremely worrisome. So, but I would really urge all of you to get out the message by Putin that he says officially that Russia is not intending to attack NATO, because I think that will help to cut through a lot of propaganda. For example, the German former general and head of the Bundeswehr, Inspector General and former #1 in NATO of the NATO Military Commission, Harald Kujat, he also came out and commented on the accusation that Russia supposedly has violated the Estonian airspace and sent drones into Poland and so forth. He said that this is completely unfounded, that the airspace is completely undefined, and that according to his calculations, the Russian airplane, the fighter jet, was completely within the corridor, which is international airspace, and it's very important that a high-ranking official, former commander of the Bundeswehr and top NATO official, is dismissing this. Now, on the situation around Gaza, you all probably know that today in Italy there is a general strike. This is very important. This has been called by two trade unions, the USB and the CGIL, and this is in reaction to the Israeli Navy intercepting the Freedom Flotilla and basically dispersing them and driving them all, towards arresting some of the people on the ships and deporting them. So the Italian population or the trade unions called for a general strike, and as far as I have heard preliminary reports, this has led to a very far-reaching shutdown of the country. And I think this gives you some sense that the growing anger and absolute disgust by large parts of the world population is growing. Now, in Germany, on the other side, 50 demonstrators who were demonstrating in Berlin against the similar interventions by the IDF were arrested, and another demonstration was not even allowed in the first place. However, it is quite important that a professor from Oxford, who is a specialist on these matters, her name is Professor Janina Dill. She had a lengthy interview in Deutschlandwelle today or yesterday, where she is warning again Germany of the legal consequences that they may be called to responsibility for abating genocide, and that they are violating their obligation to prevent genocide and violations of the Geneva Convention. And then she says, very importantly, that unfortunately Germany drew the wrong conclusion out of the Holocaust, and that one only can say that this is tragic for Germany, but obviously for Palestine, but that the German attitude on this matter is completely undermining international law and therefore has a big strategic impact. Now, obviously, what we have to do, given the fact that the situation, in my view, is pretty untenable, and I'm glad to see Mr. Kuttab here, who will obviously give us a better insight from his knowledge of the situation. But, given the fact that the right of the Palestinians was not represented in the negotiations, and Hamas supposedly is still discussing among themselves how to respond, the ultimatum till Monday, this looks not very promising to me. And that is the reason why we absolutely, with the International Peace Coalition, have to accelerate our demand that the only way how you can bring peace to the region at large is through the Oasis plan, that is a very obviously immediate ceasefire, humanitarian aid, two-state solution. All of that has to be done immediately, but you need a very extensive, broad development of water, of the Oasis plan, as we have proposed it since a couple of years now. but for the entire region, so that you create a vision for all of the countries in the region to create a future of stability. And as I said many times, I personally believe this can only be accomplished if the world moves to a new paradigm, a new international security and development architecture, which must take into account the interest of every single country on the planet in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia. Now, the possibility that the world may move in this direction, I think, is not bad at all, given the fact that you have the BRICS countries, the SCO countries, and their efforts to establish a new, more just economic order, and that the idea of such a global new architecture has been emphatically put on the table by President Xi Jinping, especially with his fourth initiative, the Global Governance Initiative, which is a very detailed proposal how to reorganize the relations among all nations on the planet, so that, basically the spirit of Bandung, the spirit of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence will govern the whole world. And I reiterate the need for us to convince the countries of the West, of Europe and the United States, that the only way how we will avoid a catastrophe, a global nuclear war down the road, maybe not too far away, but down the road, would be to give up geopolitics and establish relations among nations where each country, big or small, is being regarded as equal, sovereign, with the same rights for security and development. And if there would be an agreement on such a perspective, like it happened in the Peace of Westphalia, I'm absolutely certain that we could move into a new era of mankind. But, we have to convince people that option exists, because the mass media are not even remotely discussing such an option, and therefore the majority of the people just have no idea. But I put the Putin speech in Valdai in the beginning, because that speech does reflect the spirit of Tianjin, of the SCO meeting, of the BRICS countries. And he said again, there is the path to stability still open if the West responds positively. So I think we absolutely have to concentrate our efforts to make that known, because if people don't know it, they cannot opt for it. So that's what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Thank you, Helga, for that overview and the perspective on what can be done. I also just want to indicate I got a short report sent over to me from Liliana in Italy. She said that there was 1 million people at least who are out in the general strike. This is fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and we should have more of it. We will have people on from Germany reporting on the demonstrations there as well. I don't have a report on how many people are there, but this is very good. Great. So we shall continue, just so people know who are new. We have an opening panel discussion with speakers, experts, and organizers, and then we go to a general discussion period with the audience. So we'll continue with our agenda, which I posted in the chat. We have Mr. Kuttab, who is the Executive Director of Friends of Sabeel North America and co-founder of Nonviolence International. And you have been in the middle of many of these discussions, Mr. Kuttab. Thank you so much for making time and joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is indeed a very, very significant time. We are close to 2 years of a continuing, relentless genocide. Unlike any other event in history, this genocide is being undertaken publicly, in the light of day, being documented continuously, despite the efforts to hide it and kill the journalists and prevent journalists from going there. The facts are now clear. And of course, it is amazing that it is also being denied by those who are carrying it out, even though it is most clearly documented. And the reason why it's being denied, of course, is because people don't want to live with the legal consequences of admitting that there is a genocide taking place, because there are legal obligations to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. This is not just a question of morality and conscience and justice. It's a legal obligation. And perhaps one of the most significant things about the situation in Gaza is the attempt to destroy and undermine the very fabric and architecture of international law. In other words, and you hear this from the mouth of President Trump, but you see it from the actions of the State of Israel. The President Trump says, international law means nothing. Who has the power? He told Kaczynski, for example, you don't have cards to play. If you have the cards to play, you can do whatever you want. You can take Canada, you can take Iceland, you can take countries, you can take Gaza, because you are powerful and you can do it. You don't have to respect the integrity and sovereignty of other countries. All you have to do is to have the power to carry out whatever you want to carry out. So this is, I think, also reflected in the plan that has been proposed, which is really not a plan, it's an ultimatum. They want Hamas and the whole countries of the region to accept a new status quo where Israel, because it has power, can determine the lives of Palestinians, Tunisians, Lebanese, Syrians, Iraqis, Egyptians, Jordanians. It doesn't matter who, Israel will determine what it wants. And as long as the United States has the power to impose Israel's interests, that is basically the plan. I want to also say, if I may, something that may surprise some of you. It is even possible that Hamas will accept this plan. Why? In order to put an end to the ongoing suffering of their people, which is really tremendous, which is really, you want the bombs to stop. You want the food to be allowed in. You want the babies to be saved. You want baby formula. You want food. You want shelter. You want an end to the constant, excessive, completely unjustified bombardments. Every single day, about 100 people get killed. About 5, or actually the numbers are going less now. The last week, it was only 1 person who died from hunger in Gaza. It used to be 5 persons a day to die from hunger. This is according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. You know, they keep lying, says they are lying. If they were lying, they would not tell you that the number of people who are dying from hunger has decreased from 5 to 1 a day. I think the point that I want to make, and this is important for this gathering of people who are committed to peace, even though they have differences in their politics, differences in their ideology, differences in their identification with one party or another. We all agree that there has to be a system. There has to be law. There has to be principles that apply across the board to friend and foe alike. And the good news is that the majority of the people in the world still believe in a system of international law. Even though it is being violated on a daily basis, and it looks like there is nothing we can do to force Israel or the United States to abide by its provisions, yet people really believe in international law. That is why we had the flotilla coming and saying, you cannot impose hunger and starvation on people illegally. Of course, Israel doesn't care. They violate international law. They attack those ships in international waters. But many people in the world are saying this is not right. We have to do something to reimpose international law, to require our countries, our own leaders, to abide by international law. You see, many people say that there is no enforcement mechanism under international law because the Security Council suffers from the American veto, which makes it no longer possible for the Security Council to take action against those who systematically violate international law. But that is not true. International law is not limited to the Security Council or even to the United Nations. There are obligations on member states. Every state that has signed the Geneva Conventions, for example, Article 1 says every state has an obligation to ensure compliance. The Convention Against Genocide requires states to do something to prevent as well as punish the crime of genocide. The International Court of Justice, people say, oh, it takes too long, it is too slow. It does usually, but still it issues interim orders. And there are interim orders that have been issued requiring Israel to stop its propaganda, its genocidal incitement, and to stop starvation, using starvation as a weapon. At a minimum, these two demands, by the way, were approved 16-1, including the Israeli justice on the ICJ. He approved those things. So I want to say, I don't want to take too much time here, but I want to say that we should not give up on international law. We should continue to be creative, to be proactive, to do something new. I am very pleased about this plan that has been presented, the Oasis plan, because it shows that civil society can, in fact, think globally and can, in fact, come up with creative new solutions for the problems of the Middle East, which, by the way, didn't start on October 7, which has been going on for a long time. So we need to be creative. We need to be proactive. We need to require our own national governments to take up their obligations under existing international law. Yes, international law can be improved and made more effective, but in the meanwhile, the existing provisions of international law should be respected and should be followed and should be given full effect. So people should not give up. People should continue, because ultimately it is the people and not the governments that can bring about peace. Much of international law and the architecture of international law was created after World War II because the people demanded that there needs to be rules and regulations, that you cannot have the powerful impose their will on the weak, that you cannot have armies act without restraint against civilians, against the wounded soldiers, against diplomatic institutions, that people have to respect certain principles even when they are involved in a desperate battle or in a desperate fight. We prefer not to have any fighting, of course. We prefer to have no war at all, of course. But if there is to be a war, there have to be rules and regulations to protect the innocent civilians and to control the total power of those who are powerful. I think this is all the time I have been given today. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I think if they put them in the chat so that we can enter into this discussion. How can we, in fact, work for peace? What needs to be done? What is the obligation of all of us, each of us, within our own countries? The fact that people in Italy are out in the streets, they're demanding that their own government, and the same is true in Germany, and the same is true in many other countries of the world, demanding that their governments do something to fulfill their obligations under international law to put an end to the ongoing genocide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kuttab. And I just want to let people know both Mr. Kuttab and Professor Pires will be leaving about 12 to 12:15. If people have questions for them, please put it in the chat, and then we'll come back around before they leave so we can have a discussion with Helga and a few questions that have come in. So thank you again, Mr. Kuttab. I'm sure we're going to get a ton of questions coming in right away. We will continue to Professor Pires and then come back for discussion before you guys have to leave. Professor Pires is the head of Nu-BRICS, and you are from Brazil. And thank you so much for joining us. And we definitely look forward to your insights into what's happening around the situation with the global South. So please go ahead, Professor.
Buenos días y un cordial saludo a la señora Helga Laroche, al equipo del Instituto Schiller y a todos los presentes. Soy profesor e investigador del Núcleo de Estudios de
Greetings to
los
all,
países
Mrs. Helga Zepelarouche and all the participants. I'm the researcher of the BRICS nuclear groups at the UFF University. I would like to talk about the participation of the Portuguese-speaking countries in the 80th anniversary meeting of the United Nations. And I want to talk about Brazil under attack by Trumpism. I would like to take note of the situation of importance to the Portuguese-speaking languages and to shed some light on the very delicate situation which Brazil is facing today. I believe that the General Assembly of the United Nations consolidated a place for the Portuguese-speaking countries as a significant voice in the global discussion, inaugurating and symbolically as well, inaugurating one of the most important sessions of diplomacy with the opening speech of the Brazilian president. Among the most discussed issues discussed by the Portuguese language speaking countries were the Gaza conflict and the Ukraine crisis, the climate crisis, and the necessary reforms within the UN organization. The leaders from Portugal, as well as those from Angola, Mozambique, and others, followed along more or less the same lines. I would also like to, let's say, make a special comment, a note of the ambassador from Eastern Timor, Professor Babo Soares, who presented the perspective of one of the youngest countries of the international community, emphasizing the value of multilateralism and of international law for the self-determination of peoples and of peace for all of us. It's important as well to emphasize that the eye of a Brazil under attack by Trumpism does not refer only to a matter of a military intervention at the moment, but rather a political attack, a coordinated attack against its democratic pillars, independently of whatever its foreign policy might be, and also with relation to the role that Brazil plays in the world, especially in the global South. Therefore, the fact that to assert that Brazil is under the attack of Trumpism, more than simply some rhetorical image, this is an pragmatic interpretation of how the political dynamics, the economic dynamics, and communicational issues have been combined by and are used by the United States and are interfering and are challenging the decisions, the strategic decisions being made by Brazil. To understand this, I think the depth of the impact of Trump, it's really crucial to see this, to contrast that with the historic relationship between Brazil and the United States, which have periods of cooperation and periods of tension. In this regard, I think that since the redemocratization of Brazil in the second half of the 1980s, the foreign policy of Brazil has sought to guide itself based on pragmatism and autonomy. And in that context, Brazil sought various alliances with China, with Russia, with the European Union, India, Africa. And I believe the idea was to avoid submission to one single power center. In that way, the relationship with Washington tended towards being a pragmatic relationship without any automatic alliances, and this allowed for moments of good cooperation and other moments of divergences, depending on the different national interests at play. However, the government of Jair Bolsonaro broke with this approach and rather ideologically aligned automatically with the United States. And this was to the detriment of other countries and to the interests of Brazil itself. In other words, the Trump influence in Brazil, which came through Bolsonaro and his main allies, brought to the center of the political discussion the idea of an automatic alignment with Washington, along with a criticism of the multilateral consensuses and for a rhetoric about economic sovereignty and so on, which question international regulation, environmental policies, global governance issues, and other matters were established in terms of political communication, a kind of radical violence which was found in the great social network platforms. I think that Trumpism is a media phenomenon and which is fed by social networks, and therefore the symbiosis between Trump, Bolsonaro, and other leaders of the extreme right on a world scale reveal the use of great technologies as weapons of disinformation, of mass disinformation. All of these used and abused the platforms such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, and others to spread false news, demoralize their opponents, and to promote attacks on the institutions, creating parallel narratives which are in conflict with historical facts and with science itself. Despite the importance of the great technologies, I believe what has been most attacked is the alignment of Trump with Bolsonaro has had greater weight than the role of the BRICS. And this is challenging the BRICS' independent role, and Brazil is a thorn in the side of Trump and world unilateralism. The BRICS is a challenge to the leadership of the United States, and therefore a Brazil which is active in the BRICS is a Brazil which is non-aligned, which is not in consonance with the interests of Washington. Therefore, And I don't want to extend my remarks too much, but I do think it's important to remember that the attacks by Trump on Brazil are not isolated, but rather there are general attacks against global governance, multilateralism, and also attacks on peace itself. Why? Because we have to understand these attacks that are underway against other elements of this in this dystopic scenario, which has been imposed by President Donald Trump on the entire world. And when we speak of systems, we have to refer as well to matters of such as environmental issues, climate issues, Brazil's environmental policies are under increasing pressure, as is the case in other parts of the world as well. We have to talk about internal policies, which are also are undergoing a period of great difficulties. We have to speak as well of the mass media and political communications, because in Brazil, as in Europe, as in other parts of the world, we are in a battle for regulation of the social networks. In Brazil, for example, the digital platforms, journalists, and in the media are devoting a significant amount of space to debate on the legitimacy of the big tech companies. And we have to talk about economic matters, which establish a relationship, which is a tense one, between the political speeches and the business climate, as well as other aspects. Therefore, the polarization, the toxic polarization, and the erosion of faith in democracy are legacies which are there and before the entire world in this context of what is happening with President Bolsonaro. To say that Brazil is under attack of Trumpism is therefore to think of the way in which relationships now exist between anti-democratic ideologies, which are being globalized and spread by social networks, by big tech companies, and this is related to the way in which there are frequently internal agents that are endangering the sovereignty and the stability of democracies in all parts of the world. And we have to see as well that this is placing a situation where all of the people of the South, all of the countries in favor, people who are fighting for peace, people who are fighting for self-determination, who are fighting for the prevalence of international law worldwide, we have to join forces, because the situation in one country or another specifically many times indicates that there are difficulties which other countries are living through, which other countries are also sharing. Therefore, the importance of a forum such as this, in which we can speak with people of every part of the world and to establish important intelligent counterpoints to the problems that one way or the other we are all living through, with regard to which we are now suffering. So therefore, I thank you all very much, and I am available to continue this dialogue through whatever questions you all may have. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Professor, for that. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to go to Helga very quickly for a response, and then we'll go to a couple of questions before you both have to leave.
Well, I think, Professor, yes, you just said something extremely important, that we have to join forces. And I'm absolutely certain that if we would be able to make the solution more known to every force in every country, we could create an international movement for development. Because, the reality is that, for example, today, unfortunately, I was not able to get a Chinese speaker because it's a Chinese holiday period and it was just too too complicated. But the Chinese have recently published their report on that they have just concluded the largest water management project in the world. It's gigantic. It involves hundreds and hundreds of projects, and it's basically bigger than Navapa would have ever been if it would have been built. And that is the approach we have for the Middle East with the Oasis Plan, but also obviously it is the question of development for Latin America, the bi-oceanic railway, the the whole infrastructure development for Latin America. And I think we have to rally, because that is, in my view, if the people of these countries all would know what would be within reach, I think that's the only counter to the power of the international tech companies and their control of big data and social media and naturally mainstream media. So I think we have to join forces and make sure that more people know how easy it would be to get the world out of this if we all agree on the concept of peace through development.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to a couple of questions here before Mr. Kuttab has to leave, and then we'll go to Professor Pires. So one question comes in from Elliot. He says, Mr. Kuttab, in your recent Sabeel newsletter, you listed numerous, whoops, it jumped. Oh, where'd it go? Here we go. You've listed numerous achievements, victories for the Palestinian cause over the 2 years since October 7th. Could you elaborate on that for the IPC audience? Does it reflect the broader international new paradigm of the BRICS and the SCO?
Yes, I wrote that particular e-blast because many people fall into despair. They think there is nothing we can do. We've protested, we've written petitions, we have donated, we have done this. That doesn't change the reality on the ground. And I say, no, it does change it. The problem is that the state of Israel and the Zionist movement, which used to have a lot of sympathy and support, is now losing sympathy and support among ordinary people, among professionals, among unions, among churches, among civil society, but it continues to have power over the top 1%. It continues to have power over those who are in charge of the institutions. And so it looks on its face that we have achieved nothing. In reality, we have achieved a lot, and the changes take time and require constant activity on our behalf. So yes, there is a lot of change, even among organizations and even among constituencies and groups that used to be totally supportive of Zionism and of Israel. And I speak specifically about people in the Jewish community who have been at the forefront of resisting and calling for a ceasefire and calling for an end to genocide. I speak about people in the evangelical community who are now saying our faith does not require us to support genocide, but rather to support justice and to support peace and reconciliation. I'm speaking about people in the Democratic Party, especially young people. I'm talking about people who are willing to resist the pressures that are placed upon them by the universities. Students and teachers and union members are all saying this has to end, this has to stop. Even in sports, you find many sports teams and fans who are saying that Israel should be boycotted from Eurovision, from FIFA, from sports event until it puts an end to the genocide. This type of nonviolent resistance is in fact increasing throughout the world, and especially in Europe, but also in the United States. And this is a cause for celebration. It's a cause for encouragement. It's a cause for solidarity to reassess the flotilla that went and that continues to go. I understand that there's new boats from Turkey and from Italy that have started to go towards Gaza to break this illegal siege and blockade that Israel has placed on preventing food, especially baby formula, from being allowed into Gaza.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kuttab, for that. I think it's also notable the amount of work that people went into the UN, that this is also very
Absolutely.
reflective. The walkout that happened, the fact that people
Absolutely.
are making a
Yeah.
serious stand, which is a big deal to me personally, even though many of the objectives that people wanted to do at that time did not happen, it still represents a shift in the international community and what they're willing to do. I see there's a few more questions. I want to make sure to get a question for Professor Pires before he has to leave as well. So let me grab one for you. Pires. So there is a question that comes in from Iberoamerica. They ask, what are the main conflict hypotheses that Brazil currently has? What do you think? Please go ahead if you have an answer for that.
Sí, penso que sim. Pero que em
Yes,
primeiro lugar,
I do. First of all,
agradecer
I would like to thank Helga Zeppelarouche for her comments.
me centraré en uno
I
solo,
will focus on just one
el agua.
theme
El agua
to
es
discuss
uno de
in
los temas
water.
más
Water
importantes
is one of the most important
No habrá
issues in the world. There cannot be
ni,
development
desarrollo sustentable
nor
sin
sustainable
acceso
development
universal
without universal access to water, which is conceived as a public good, not as a commodity. Then we have to be clear that relations between Brazil and the United States today are they're relations of great tension, in particular with regard to relations with the global South. Why? Because the countries of the global South are today functioning as a platform for joining or connecting one with the other, which I think is one of the most important, if not the most important of all history. And that is the BRICS. For example, we had here in Brazil, during the government of ex-President Bolsonaro, who tried to dismantle the policy of Brazil's working closely with the BRICS, the ex-president publicly attacked China, saying that coronavirus was the Chinese virus, and he attacked the strategic relationship of Brazil with the European Union, which to some degree was interrupted during his administration. Also, under of the aegis of Trumpism, the influence of President Trump in Brazil, which we have to keep in mind. This is two presidential periods of Trump. So they tried to undermine the negotiating capabilities of Brazil, not just of Brazil in the world, but also positioning the United States in the world in terms of global negotiations. I think that the MAGA project in the United States is a decadent proposal, but the vigorous reintegration of Brazil in the BRICS under the Lula government today is reaffirming a that view, but it's a very difficult situation because why? We have to recognize that the world today is strongly impacted by Trumpism, very impacted by the different connections which the extreme right has all around the world. For example, the situation in Gaza is a situation in which a nation, a colonial nation, an imperialist nation, which is Israel, projects its power throughout the region and especially over the Palestinians in Gaza. But this is a situation which we must say has global great repercussions, is being repeated with other characteristics in other parts of the world. We have to look, for example, at the U.S. domination in Panama with the issue of the Panama Canal and its territorial intentions in Greenland, the warlike position with which is being faced now with the U.S. against Venezuela, which is literally surrounded by military forces of the United States, which can at any moment precipitate and carry out an invasion of the sovereign territory of Venezuela. Therefore, we are facing a global situation which is quite difficult. And before that, yes, we have to join our forces politically globally to attempt to combat a very great force which presents itself as an imperialist force over all of the peoples of the world.
Thank you, Professor. I want to circle back to Helga real quick before you both have to leave. If you have a response or if either of you have a response to what's been said thus far. Go ahead, Helga.
Well, I want to specify what I said before. I think we really need to create a movement of people fighting for the notion and the concept of peace through development. And I mean, in particular, economic development. Because, you know, the peace movement in Europe, for example, I don't know how the Italian demonstrations went, but in Germany, and maybe we can hear from our German colleagues in the discussion period about that, the German peace movement does not have the idea of a solution. They are against war, but they are not thinking of how to overcome the causes of the war, you know, which is really the underdevelopment, and the way out of it is that people would join for the concept of joint development for everybody, so that every single person on the planet can fulfill and develop all the potentials which are potentially in them, and which under poverty and hunger naturally are completely crippled. If we would have mass movements of students, of young people, of peace-loving people who would all say, we demand that the underdevelopment of the global South be overcome for sure, that the age of colonialism must be ended, and we in the West are joining hands with you to help you to overcome all these terrible crises of lack of water, lack of food, lack of medicine, and that is what we are fighting for. I think this could become an unbeatable force, and you know, the majority of the world, which are the 99%, would join together, or maybe at least 80%, leaving a couple of people indifferent, but the majority of the world would be for that if they would know and would be organized by leaders for it. So let's just do that.
Then I'll go to you, Mr. Kuttab. I see you're unmuted. Do you have a response before you leave?
Yes, I like what Lady Helga has been saying. We really need to look at the causes for conflict, and we need to be creative in finding solutions. We are now, as a human race, at a position where we can solve most of our problems. there is enough food to feed everybody. There are enough mechanisms to prevent war from going on. We can, in fact, lift people out of poverty. We need to cooperate globally to deal with challenges like global environmental issues, like AI, like epidemics and pandemics. We can, in fact, solve these people if we work together. It is possible now. And if the governments don't do it, the populations have to do something about it. So I'm very much in favor of that approach.
Excellent. Mr. Kuttab, can you stay on for just another moment? We
Okay.
do have a response from President Donald Ramotar, who is the former president of Guyana. Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Ramotar, President Ramotar.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of the presenters for the information. Just quickly to say, the proposals that was put forward for peace in Gaza is not a proposal for peace. It's really a surrender in my view. What is happening there, what they can't achieve by military means, they want to achieve it by this negotiation after inflicting so much of terrible harm on the people of Palestine. But there one point I want to make, that I think that maybe if necessary, some campaign should be done about it, because one of the reasons this crisis is going on and on and on is the fact that the main broker in this is the United States, and the United States is not an honest broker. It is totally on the side of Israel, and it is protecting Israel and promoting Israel and even promoting the genocide. Therefore, I think that maybe we should start to talk about the prominent members of the Security Council having a greater role in the negotiations that should take place, and the discussion and the plans that should be there. If not the whole prominent members of the Security Councils, maybe one or two others should join into this process to try to prevent this one-sided arrangement that will never bring peace to the Middle East if the United States is the only broker. They're not an honest broker. They're totally on the side of Israel, and they're trying to have Israel achieve their goals. They're assisting Israel to achieve their goals of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. That's just what I would like to say, to whether we should not start a campaign or a discussion to involve real honest brokers, or at least balance it so that the Palestinians will have a better opportunity.
I totally agree with you, President. I think the issue is not finding the right broker, because clearly the United States is not an honest broker, but finding maybe the procedure, the process, the principles, the framework for the discussion. Right now, there is no framework. The only framework is by ultimatum and fiat. This is it. Take it or leave it. You can do it the easy way or the hard way, but you have to do it our way. We impose our will on you. There is no discussion. There is no negotiation. There is just power imposing itself on people and trying to defeat them, rather than trying to work out a solution that they can live with. So yes, I totally agree with you. We need a whole new framework of dealing with the issues of peace, and not just have the United States impose its will. Thank you for your comment.
And thank you for staying on longer. You're probably in a big rush to get to your next meeting, but we appreciate you being on, Mr. Kuttab, as well as you, Professor Pires, and the dialogue that we've been able to have here today. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to continue with our agenda and then come back to the general discussion period. So next, we're going to go to Professor Steve Starr, who is a regular IPC participant and contributor. He is a professor at the University of Missouri, former director of the MU Clinical Laboratory Science Program, and I'd say a leading expert on nuclear weapons, if I dare say so myself. So please go ahead, Professor Steve Starr.
Okay, thank you. I probably should note that I think the university has found fault with my criticism of certain things like the genocide in Israel and mandated vaccinations, and so I'm no longer teaching at the university. But I'm still talking about nuclear weapons. I'd like to share my screen with y'all. And what I want to talk about today is what the end of nuclear arms control is rapidly approaching. On February 5th, 2026, the New START treaty will expire. That's the last nuclear arms agreement that's in existence. And what that means is that in a very short period of time, the number of deployed nuclear warheads, strategic nuclear warheads, will probably double. Now, President Putin has offered recently to extend the treaty. And the response from the United States has been, rather than an immediate acceptance, a discussion of sending long-range missiles to Ukraine. That's not exactly what I would say. Thank you. So I'd like to also talk about what it would mean if U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired at Russia. It basically would mean war with Russia, because only U.S. planes and naval vessels can currently fire Tomahawk missiles. Look at the history now. New START came about 2011. It was after a succession of treaties. START 1 treaty back in 1994 limited the number of warheads to 6,000. And you can see down at the bottom number of warheads, a column there. START 2 was negotiated. It was going to limit the warheads between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to 3,000 to 3,500, but the U.S. never ratified that treaty, and eventually the Soviets withdrew from it. In 2003, they had the Moscow Treaty, which is called SORT Treaty, and sort of ironically, it was called the Sort of Treaty because it did place a limit of 1,700 to 2,200 nuclear warheads for each side, but the treaty only came into effect the day that it expired, so it wasn't much of a treaty at all. Then the new START, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, that's what START stands for, came into force in 2011. And that did limit, significant limitation. It wasn't great, but it was an improvement over what we had. I mean, we had 60, 70,000 nuclear weapons in 1986 between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. So that New START limited it to 800 strategic delivery vehicles. You can see over in this column there. Now, that strategic delivery vehicles is a euphemism, basically. It means strategic nuclear bombers, strategic missiles, and nuclear subs. And the missiles that they carry are delivery vehicles, deliver them to the target. And then the number of deployed strategic delivery vehicles was 700. So that was the limitation. You decided how you wanted to do that. So currently, now there was a weird part about that treaty that it called each long-range bomber had one warhead. Well, actually, our B-52s can carry 20 air-launched cruise missiles with 20 nuclear weapons. So the real number was about 1,670. But so the New START treaty, it will lose all these things that it provides: the verification, the data exchange, the confidence-building measures. We let it go away. And right now, we can have up to 18 on-site inspections each year, and we have the right to verify, the Russians do too, the number of nuclear warheads that are on missiles and bombers. There is also a biannual declaration of the total number of warheads on the missiles, bombers, and also the location of these forces. And there's a requirement for notification of any changes of these forces, and there's a pledge not to hide any nuclear-armed missiles and bombers from the verification process or to interfere with satellite imagery or transmissions. And there's also a notification of missile sets, which is important because if we have strained relations and the U.S. decides to launch an ICBM from Vandenberg The Russians might want to know whether or not that's a test or if it's aimed at them. Well, we're going to lose all of that February 5th, 4 months from now, if we don't renew this treaty. These charts show you what the estimates of the U.S. strategic forces, there's for Russia and a combination. You can see currently deployed, we have 665 launchers with about 1,670 warheads. Well, they call it uploading. You know, what happened was we took a number of warheads off the missiles that are on the subs and the land-based ICBMs. They can be uploaded back on. The bombers can quickly be added. We can add 400, nuclear warheads on the air-launched cruise missiles in a day, in a matter of hours. The Russians can do the same thing. They can add another 400. So that's 800 warheads within a day of the expiration of the treaty. 800 nuclear warheads are a lot of warheads. But it'll get worse, progressively worse, as they upload the warheads to the missiles. That takes a little bit longer, but within a few months we'll have probably almost a doubling of deployed nuclear warheads. You can see currently we have 1,670 deployed strategic nuclear warheads in the U.S. and 1,674 in Russia. We would go up to 3,570 in the USA, 26. When you get thousands of warheads, it just becomes overkill. And a strategic nuclear warhead is a warhead that has an explosive power of 100 kilotons or more, well, 90 to 100. A kiloton is 1,000 tons of TNT, so 90 to 100,000 tons of TNT explosive power per warhead. But these warheads are more like a piece of the sun when they explode. They're not just like TNT. Well, meanwhile, in Europe, there's a war madness going on. The Europeans apparently really want to have a war with Russia, which I can make no sense out of at all. I mean, the United Kingdom has a military force of like 78,000 people in their army. They wouldn't be able to fill up a large soccer stadium. Estonia, which has a population less than St. Petersburg, said they want to sink all the Russian ships. I mean, if you look at these headlines, the French are warning they have to be ready tonight for high-intensity warfare. They also have sent out notices to get all the hospitals ready for tens of thousands of casualties this winter. I mean, it's madness. Hungary is the only one of the few European states that's not going along with this, but Viktor Orban, just posted that the situation is serious, as outright pro-war proposals are on the table. So, I mean, this is crazy. And these people need to remember that the U.S. and NATO cannot shoot down Russian missiles. This headline today from Zero Hedge says Russia has upgraded missiles to successfully evade Ukraine's Patriots. Well, they're U.S. Patriot missiles. They're right now, the current interception rate is 6% of the Russian missiles that are coming in. So, shoot 100 missiles, they might shoot down 6 of them. If those are nuclear warheads on those missiles, it won't do you much good. So, meanwhile, in Washington, they don't seem to be aware of this either, that the 20th century Patriot technology is impossible. You can't even intercept Russian hypersonic missiles. Apparently, they're considering sending long-range missiles to Ukraine. Now, that was what Biden was doing. If you remember, about a year ago, the U.S. under Biden was launching missiles into Russia. And these missiles require U.S. technicians and U.S. targeting data. So basically, it's a U.S. launching missiles and Britain into Russia. Act of war. Putin outright said in September that the U.S. and NATO were at war with Russia. Well, Russia doesn't like the idea of Tomahawk missiles, and there's a really good reason for that. But the European leaders in Russia and the Americans seem to think that it's okay. I saw this cartoon. It said 5 out of 6 scientists have proven that Russian roulette is harmless. That's what they're doing here. They keep pulling the trigger, and sooner or later it's going to go off. Well, what you really need to understand is the Tomahawk cruise missiles can only be fired from U.S. aircraft and naval vessels, the ones that we have right now. We can't just give them to Ukraine. The ones that are in the U.S. arsenal, the ones that were present before, were destroyed under the international the INF treaty, that was a intermediate range nuclear forces treaty that was a great treaty that the U.S. basically and Russia, the U.S. walked away from it. But they can't be fired by Ukraine. Only U.S. planes and ships and subs can fire them. And, so that's an act of war. If the U.S. fires a Tomahawk cruise missile into Russia, the U.S. will be at war with Russia. And the Russians fully understand that. That's what they're telling us. So there's Tomahawk missiles that are carried by naval vessels. They cannot be armed with a nuclear warhead. But the ones carried by U.S. B-52 bombers are nuclear armed. And so Russia will have to assume that any Tomahawk cruise missile entering its airspace will carry a nuclear warhead. So in other words, if they see a Tomahawk cruise missile coming in, they have to assume, I mean, if they don't, they might not know where all the B-52 bombers are, because that's where, if it's coming from a B-52, it's a nuclear armed missile. This shows you the range of a Tomahawk cruise missile. I mean, if, well outside of the Russian border, you can hit all over the place in Russia. Moscow's just not too far at all. So that's what the Russians are looking at. The U.S. has 58 U.S. B-52H strategic nuclear bombers, and they each carry up to 20 air-to-ground missiles, the air-launched cruise missiles. And each Tomahawk has a variable yield W81 nuclear warhead with an explosive power of either 5 to 150 kilotons, 150,000 tons of TNT explosive equivalent. So, I'm going to show a clip here. We don't learn much about nuclear weapons. I got this clip from a science fiction movie, Terminator 2. And it's basically a dream that this lady's having. She's trying to warn everybody to get away. There's going to be a nuclear attack. But it does show realistic depictions of the detonation and the shockwave blasting the city and the fire effects. I want to warn everybody, this is graphic. So if you don't want to watch this, you don't want your kids to watch it, please, tune out for a minute. But this is what one of those air-launched cruise missiles would do if it detonated over a city. So she awakens from the dream, and it's time for the people of the world to awaken from this dream and get rid of these nuclear weapons before they eliminate us. Because there's no political or national goal that's worth risking the destruction of most life on Earth. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Starr, or I guess I should say former Professor Starr, which I'd like to congratulate you for all of the troublemaking that you've been
Well, it's hard to
having.
make me keep my mouth shut, but
No, don't do that.
I'm not going to. If I see genocide, I'm going to call it genocide. I don't care It's a disgrace. It's unbelievable that the United States is doing this, and that the universities would shut down protests and call the police because the students want to protest genocide. What are we teaching them? Be good Germans? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, really. Yes. No, thank you for everything that you're doing. And I just want to encourage people from other organizations that are on to go to Steve Starr, have him present at your local meetings and your organizational meetings. He clearly has the time to do that now and can do a great job
Yeah.
on taking people through what a nuclear war actually is.
I have a
And
website too. It's nuclear famine, all one word, .org. And I have a lot of descriptions of what nuclear weapons do there. And so that's more another source of information.
excellent. Thank you.
Mhm.
And we're going to continue with the agenda, and then we'll come back. We are getting more and more questions. And I apologize to everybody who submitted questions. Kuttab and Mr. Professor Pires could only stay on till about 12 o'clock. So we tried to get through at least a couple for both of them. Okay, so next we're going to go to Larry Johnson, who's a former CIA officer and member of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. He's also someone who regularly travels around the world and gets a real sense of what's happening, especially in Russia and other parts of the world like that. So thank you so much for joining us, Larry, and please go ahead. You have the floor.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that Donald Trump changed the Department of Defense name to Department of War. Department of Defense was christened back in 1947, 1949, after we had been involved with the war, and it was more premised on the concept that we didn't need to be going out and attacking other countries. Right now, the United States has deployed 4 missile destroyers off the coast of Venezuela, 3 amphibious ships that are capable of landing up to 5,000 Marines on the shores of Venezuela, at least a squadron of F-35s that have been deployed forward to Puerto Rico. The United States has committed criminal acts of war against Venezuela, destroying boats that they claim were carrying narcotics. And yet those boats, the people on those boats, did not take any hostile action towards any U.S. ship or any U.S. person. I draw the parallel that if you're a cop sitting in Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, and you see a drug transaction going on, within eye view, you do not, as a cop, have the authority or the right to get out and shoot those people because you think they're engaged with something that's illegal. You can go up and try to arrest the person you suspect of selling narcotics, illegal narcotics. And then at that point, if they pull a gun on you or a knife, yeah, then you could shoot them. But what the United States is doing is the equivalent of just seeing what they think might be a drug transaction and killing people. We saw Donald Trump yesterday issued another executive order, basically creating, in his mind, a pretext to be able to attack Venezuela. I think an attack on Venezuela is imminent, probably within the next week at a minimum, because of the size of this fleet that's been deployed. It is just too costly to keep them there. At the same time, the Trump administration has moved a fleet of KC-135 tankers that are used to refuel combat aircraft. Those passed through the United Kingdom the other day and are now reportedly arriving in Al Udeid Air Force Base, which received a little bit of attention back on June 25th when Iran hit it after a coordinated with the United States about how they were going to hit. The Carrier Task Force Group, I think the Gerald Ford, is moving now towards the Persian Gulf as well. So there are, and then just within the last hour and a half, Trump has issued an ultimatum to Hamas that they must accept his peace plan or there will be, quote, hell to pay. Trump apparently is not paying attention to what has been happening in Gaza over the last 23, 24 months. They have been living through hell that has been facilitated in part by the U.S. support of genocide. So I'll just, and then let's not forget Ukraine. The United States has basically tried to dump the responsibility for carrying the war forward into the hands of the Europeans. And Emmanuel Macron has been eager to pick up that challenge. They seized temporarily one of the Russian ghost ships the other day carrying oil. And Vladimir Putin spoke to that yesterday at the Valdai conference, making clear that this was piracy, and that if it wasn't released, Russia would have more than strong words to say to France. I'll leave it at that. But the Europeans are clearly panicked by the direction the war is going, with Ukraine losing more ground each day. And the key infrastructure, Russia has stepped up its attacks on the electrical system in particular. I think the goal of the Russian General Staff is to bring this thing to as rapid a conclusion as possible. And so we'll see, I think, increased military operations on the part of the Russians going forward over the next 3 months. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Larry, for your analysis and overview of what is going on in the world. Thank you very much for that. We are going to come back for more discussion. We have one more item that I'd like to bring up, which is Father Burry, who is also known as the Maverick Priest, which I had the pleasure of meeting in person finally in Minneapolis just last weekend, where his 12 days of nonviolence, he's holding a peace conference, which I think is wrapping up now. But he sent in an audio recording of his analysis of what's happening, and report on his events and the Oasis plan. So I'll just say again, he's of the Minneapolis-St. Paul Nonviolent Organization, and also is a member of the U.S. Priests Association. So please play that audio, please.
Thanks ever so much, Anastasia, for inviting me to share what is currently occurring in our area. As a Roman Catholic priest in the Twin Cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis in Minnesota, USA, I founded an association named Twin Cities Nonviolent. Our mission is to create an environment in which the Twin Cities and beyond can become free from violence. In so doing, we have partnered with the Schiller Institute in promoting the Oasis Peace Plan, which is peace through development, particularly financial development. This peace plan is already being implemented by the BRICS nations, B for Brazil, R for Russia, I for India, C for China, and S for South Africa, with more than 14 other nations joining them, mostly from the global south. That makes these nations, joining them, perhaps representing about 3/4 of the population of the world. Amazing. The mission for this plan of development is for the developed nations of the planet to stop competing and to cooperate in contributing to the underdeveloped nations. So all the nations experience equity, that every nation be equal to every other nation. As a consequence, the mayors of St. Paul and Minneapolis have declared their respective cities actively nonviolent cities. Thus, the Schiller Institute and Twin Cities Nonviolent are modeling cooperating at the international level by together promoting the Oasis Peace Plan, and locally by assisting ex-gang members in North Minneapolis to develop, to enable them to get jobs that pay a living wage, or, if they wish, to start their own business. In the future, we intend to do the same training with the young warriors in Africa. We invite you participants in the International Peace Coalition to join this mission. We are also considering writing to Pope Leo and asking him to encourage the Oasis Peace Plan through development throughout the world to get as many people involved as we can. For the Oasis Peace Plan, through development, is making or creating hope to the hopeless. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to send my gratitude again to Father Burry for inviting me to the event to speak and for promoting the Oasis Plan. I was very impressed by the people who came to the meeting and the desire to form a IPC Schiller station there in order to promote the Oasis Plan and get more people involved. So I look forward to assisting you with that. And if you'd like help in making that happen, I'm happy to come back and also make phone calls with you to recruit more of the people who came, which was an excellent discussion. Very good discussion on how we create true nonviolence and organizing people around bigger thoughts instead of just trying to resolve conflicts, but how do you make this an obsolete idea altogether? So thank you again. And given the time, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to the discussion period and then open it up for the audience to ask questions. And we have a couple of reports already lined up. So I'll just make the announcement. If you are on over any other platform besides Zoom, if that's Rumble, YouTube, X, and wherever else this is being broadcast, I know there's others. Please you want to be part of the discussion, please go to schillerinstitute.com. Right on the top of the website, there is an RSVP link. Please select that and register. You must be registered to get the Zoom link. And once you have the Zoom link, you can hop on and be part of the dialogue with the current speakers that we have on. And with that, Dave, please let me know when we have cut the stream.